They trusted her with the destiny of the kingdom. They gave her authority, presence, and stillness. However, this royal guard heard something that he was not supposed to hear. Behind a locked door on a protected line, he overheard Camila recruit a contract murderer. He overheard her refer to the king as an anchor, an issue that needed to be solved. Worse, he overheard her striking strategy during a live speech. Could you hope with a weapon waiting beneath the podium and Charles at the top? He may have reported it. He could have buried it. On the contrary, he stopped it, and when the world wondered who had saved the crown that day, he said nothing until now. Before I tell how one royal guard risked everything to uncover Camila's darkest secret and what occurred when the king found out, be sure to subscribe with notifications enabled and leave a comment letting us know where in the world you are viewing from, because what you are about to see wasn't a rumor, there was no drama, it was almost regicide. In the thick autumn fog of London, Sergeant Nathan Ward was adjusting his white gloves outside Lancaster House. The beautiful yellow facade was lit up like a movie set as the sky grew darker. But as soon as he stepped out of the cargo vehicle, he felt uneasy. This was not his usual assignment. At Windsor, where children waved and visitors took pictures, Nathan was on court duty and acting as a ceremonial guard. But he had been withdrawn for internal security tonight at what the briefing called a cultural diplomacy reception. He had served 2 deployments in Afghanistan before he was given the official outfit. He was able to identify details that were inconsistent. First of all, Home Office protocol had been totally evaded by the guest list. Several security clearances were indicated as pending, which was unusual for an event involving foreign dignitaries. A logistics officer hardly looked up from her clipboard when Nathan brought it up during the briefing. Lady Camila formally requested discretion. Next were the catering cases. Nathan had seen 3 large, unlabeled, padlocked containers enter the back courtyard without being inspected. The handler signed them off with one of Camila's personal assistants. No dogs, no affirmation, no questions. The final red flag was the employees. Half of the regular stewards had suddenly been replaced by a group of outside hospitality consultants. These were black lanyards, not the usual blue ones. Instead of British accents, they were South African or perhaps Australian, hard to find. Nathan didn't talk about his concerns. Guards don't speculate. But his eyes captured everything, just as they had on night patrols outside Kandahar when the silence was too perfect. Inside Lancaster House, the welcome was already humming with muted vigor. A group of politicians in tailored clothes gathered near the windows. Foreign dignitaries enjoyed champagne across from oil masterpieces worth more than most people's homes. Camila moved across the audience with such ease that Nathan thought she owned it. He had been watching the flow between the main ballroom and the private salons from the east hallway. His radio occasionally crackled with the routine chatter of a server asking about dietary needs, a delegate refusing to give up his phone, or a baroness requesting a different seat. Normal sound. However, Nathan kept getting the feeling that something wasn't quite right from his instincts, which had saved his life when IEDs were hidden in road dust. The kind of wrong that came from time and location. He switched on his body microphone just in case. Standard etiquette is rarely needed for ceremonial tasks. Tonight was different. As he alternated between his station and the rear steps, he noticed the drawn curtain in the private library, which was supposed to be empty. Through the fabric that straightened his back, he heard a voice. Camila was shrewd and in control, yet she was supposed to be out of that room. With his boots soft on marble and his hand instinctively resting near his ceremonial sword, ready but not drawn, Nathan took a step forward. When he heard what happened next, everything changed. Nathan positioned himself just short of the curtain so he could hear the conversation without poking his ear to the door like a palace gossip. The voices inside were clear-cut, direct, and operational. Camila's tone was obviously colder and more focused than the staged warmth she used when she was in public. There was stillness for a time, before someone spoke. The timing has to be perfect, no deviation. Do you understand? Then Nathan heard a male voice he couldn't place. It wasn't British, American, or perhaps South African, and it had a clipped accent. Contractors used professional language when discussing wet work. Nathan felt his heart freeze. It was hardly a courteous little exchange. As long as your team holds the doors for exactly 90 seconds, it's done. After that, I'm a ghost. This kind of operational language was used by men who killed for a living. I want it clean. No spectacle. He collapses. Medics rush in. We move forward with transition protocols. No scandal, just grief. Camila was once again softer, but each syllable penetrated the silence. Nathan felt the words as if they were a physical blow. She was talking about her husband, King Charles, and his assassination with the clinical coldness of someone ordering a caterer. Another pause. The contractor's voice said, "You'll receive confirmation at 6 a.m. No names after that. No contact. Payment clears on delivery." Nathan's training started. He adjusted his sleeve so the body mic picked up every phrase of his steady, calm breathing. Due to considerable background noise and a lack of visual confirmation, the tape would not be permitted in court, even though it would be adequate to ask the right questions. As Camila finished speaking, he tightened his hands and added, "I want this behind us before his address tomorrow morning. Charles is dragging the monarchy backwards with his sentimentality. I won't let him take the rest of us down with him." A phone on a table, the rustle of expensive cloth, the sound of footfall. Nathan stepped back as the door handle twisted. A woman in a gray suit showed up, but it wasn't a palace employee or someone he recognized from security briefings. She glanced at him briefly to register rank and uniform, then moved down the east corridor with the purposeful calm of someone who should not have been there but belonged. Nathan didn't follow. She was able to blend in with the crowd because he refused to back down. But in his chest, something cold and hard had taken root. This was no longer just a theory. Somewhere in Lancaster House, the Queen Consort herself had ordered a professional killer to kill the King of England. He had fewer than a dozen hours to stop it. Nathan didn't immediately make a big impression. It was methodical. Intelligence resided in paperwork, and he required it. The internal security roster, kept in a white binder near the staff annex, was largely ignored by everyone but rookie operations officers. Nathan ought not to have examined it. But tonight, the usual rules did not apply. He opened the binder, took a casual look over his shoulder, and went to the third-party credentials section. J. Garrett, an external audio consultant, clearance green, origin private subcontractor, and discretionary office, was the one who made him shiver. He traced his finger along each column of authorization codes, clearance levels, and names. The palace code is the discretionary office of Camila's personal staff. Nathan had heard the name Garrett before. During a base rotation in Helmand in 2018, a briefing about local private military contractors had been held. Garrett had been flagged, extrusion recon, the kind of agent that concentrated on executive interventions for clients who purchased cryptocurrency, was no longer mentioned in official records after 2009. Now that he was here, he had full access to Lancaster House. The consent was given by Camila herself. Nathan examined the arrangement of the media stations, sightlines, and podiums in the Lancaster House ballroom. Garrett was scheduled to undergo 2 equipment assessments, one an hour before to the door's opening, and another 15 minutes prior to the king's speech. The timing, the kill zone, and the cover are all flawless. Cameras would surround the king, which would be lifted and illuminated. A single muffled shot would disappear into the resulting pandemonium beneath the applause. Security wouldn't realize what had happened until Garrett was gone. Nathan closed the binder and returned it to its proper place. He moved like a man who didn't care, despite the fact that every muscle in his body was tense. They would see nothing but a bored guard going through the motions, but he was sure someone was watching. Not whether he should do anything at all, but how to accomplish it without dying, or worse, telling Camila that her scheme had been foiled, was the dilemma now. He needed proof, hard evidence, more than overheard conversations and suspicious schedules, was needed to identify the people who worked behind the scenes, the people who saw everything because everyone else ignored them. Nathan went to the bottom level of the building, where the actual work was being done. Here, beneath the marble and crystal, the working core of Lancaster House was revealed, the passageways that made sure events went smoothly, the equipment rooms, and the utility halls. In the ballroom's understage area, he found her crouched behind the podium, a headlamp fastened to her hat, soldering cables that ran into the main audio array. She was completely absorbed in her work. "The words don't jump," Nathan whispered. She was startled in spite of this, and struck her head on a steel support beam. "Jesus, sorry, I didn't hear you coming. My fault. You're Megan Carter." She narrowed her eyes. "How do you know my name?" Nathan knelt beside her and whispered, "Because your name was almost removed from tonight's roster. Camila's office submitted a revision request this morning." With a puzzled expression on her face, Megan sat back on her heels. "I wasn't told about any changes," Nathan told him. "That's why I wanted to talk to you. Have you seen anything unusual today? Equipment that wasn't logged? Access requests from people you didn't recognize?" She hesitated, then reached into a neighboring supply container and took out a little black carrying case. It has a brass embossed sticker with Camila's own crest on it. "This was sitting by the main podium junction when I arrived this morning," she said. "No requisition form, no work order. It wasn't here during yesterday's prep." Nathan opened the case gingerly. It featured what seemed like a hollow, finely crafted shell casing, a high-frequency transmitter node, and a tiny motion sensor. Not audio equipment, but parts for weapons. "There's something else," Megan said, reaching into her toolbox. She handed him a green keycard. "One of Camila's aides told me to dispose of this quietly, said it was an extra security override that wasn't needed anymore." Nathan held the card up to the overhead light. "Level 4 clearance, which is adequate to review lockdown protocols during a royal event. The kind of access that would allow for unhindered mobility, even in the case of heightened security. According to Megan, it also opens the technical entrance on the east side, which leads directly to the crawl space inside the podium." But she wasn't finished. Her voice dipped lower with nervous energy, and her words came out faster. "There's been other weird stuff too. Yesterday I caught someone in the equipment room who wasn't on the manifest. Tall guy, foreign accent, said he was double-checking acoustics, but he was measuring sightlines, not sound patterns. And this morning, 2 of our regular AV crew called in sick at the last minute. Both of them. That never happens." Taking out her phone, she showed Nathan a blurry photo of a man crouched around the base of the podium, but it was clear enough to establish that he shared the same build as the voice Nathan had heard through the curtain. "I took this when I thought he wasn't looking," she whispered. Something about him felt wrong. The pieces started to come together faster as Nathan looked at the photo. Military, maybe, but not our military. This wasn't just about removing Megan from tonight's roster. It was about replacing experienced palace staff with people who wouldn't ask the right questions. "You may have just saved the king's life," Nathan told her. Megan shook her head. "I don't want to be involved in whatever this is." "You already are," Nathan remarked, "and now so am I." Beneath the stage was a cramped, tiny hallway that smelled of electrical parts and the hume of machinery, like the belly of a ship. Nathan walked carefully, all his senses keen. Even though there had been a recent guest, the ballroom above was now silent. Even though the majority of the equipment checks had ended for the evening, there wasn't much of an access panel on the podium, but enough for someone who understood what to look for. Nathan has witnessed similar staging in Afghanistan, with small details designed to look accidental, while providing simple access for follow-up operations. He moved slowly forward, a ceremonial blade readied but not in its sheath, nestled inside the hole of the podium, encircled by the usual tangle of wires and connections, was a matte black device that was unlike anything used for lighting or music. A flexible mounting arm was attached to the underside of the king's lectern. Its grip was designed to hold exactly what looked like a little pistol. Nathan picked up the device and took images of everything with his wrist cam. When his fingers brushed the casing, he noticed something else, a small paper tag hidden beneath the mounting bracket. He pulled it loose carefully. It wasn't a palace inventory. The receipt was scrawled in blue ink, and the final placement was confirmed. The extraction point is Service Exit T. The vehicle is prepared. At 11:47 a.m. and 3 minutes after the king's speech was scheduled to begin, Nathan pocketed the receipt, then reached for the device again. Just as his fingers brushed the case, he heard a voice behind him, and his blood froze. "You're not supposed to be here." Nathan spun around, but the man was already on the go. Garrett had driven a shoulder into Nathan's spine and smashed him chest first against the metal structure. The impact pushed air from his lungs and shot flashes of pain through his ribs. Like a pro, Garrett moved without hesitation or wasted motion. One arm encircled Nathan's throat in a chokehold, while the other ensnared his sword arm. Years of combat experience went into every action. "Tell me who sent you," Garrett growled and clenched his fist. It was not long before Nathan answered. He collapsed them both onto the wiring rack by shifting his weight and kicking backward. Metal groaned and cables ignited as they slammed hard on the ground. The fall loosening Garrett's grip a little, Nathan was able to shove his elbow into the man's ribs. He felt something give. It was obviously wounded but not breaking. Garrett caught his hip with his outstretched hand. Nathan instinctively drew his ceremonial bayonet from its scabbard upon noticing the movement, parrying instead than killing. The blade hooked Garrett's wrist, and Nathan twisted, using strength to force the weapon away. The sound of knuckles hitting metal walls echoed. Garrett swore in what sounded like Afrikaans, and his weapon clanked into the darkness. The two men struggled for control. Nathan grabbed the pistol mount from behind the lectern and used the sharp edge as a club to strike Garrett's temple. It wasn't enough to kill him, because Nathan wasn't an executioner, but it was enough to bring him down. Nathan's wheezing was the only sound in the corridor. Garrett lay unconscious, a trickle of blood streaming from his scalp. Nathan tied him up with maintenance wire, then activated the silent alert protocol, which, without broadcasting to the palace's wider communications system, requires holding his ceremonial badge for 3 seconds to ping Royal Guard dispatch. He had grown suspicious of the traditional paths. Gazing down at the unconscious assassin, Nathan considered the ramifications of what he had stopped. In fewer than 9 hours, King Charles would be standing at the podium. Had someone not stepped in, he would have been right in Garrett's crosshairs, but apprehending the killer was only half the fight. Now he had to prove to whom he had been hired. The dawn came grim and cold, the kind of London morning that made metal buttons ache through wool and converted breath to vapor in the sharp air. Nathan's body ached from the fight with Garrett. Even after 3 hours of recuperation in the barracks, a scarlet bruise ran across his ribcage, and a small bandage covered the cut on his neck where the assassin's fingernail had snagged him. Nothing showed through his immaculate crimson tunic. Lancaster House hummed with controlled chaos. Media vans were positioned along the road, their satellite dishes aimed toward a bleak sky. Palace personnel escorted dignitaries past security checkpoints with exacting accuracy. The royal standard ascended the flagpole softly, signaling the approach of the monarch. Nathan had requested a change of assignment. Nathan would be waiting in the hallway that led to the stage area where Garrett had planned his attack, but he was now officially guarding the service door, a role so minor that probationary guards were usually assigned to it. At 10:42 a.m., King Charles entered the state Bentley, the Rolls-Royce grille gleaming despite the overcast skies. He had the methodical stride of someone who has spent decades in the spotlight. He nodded to the Chancellor, gave a Commonwealth delegate a fleeting smile, and shook hands firmly with the Defense Secretary. The crowd applauded as he entered the ballroom, but Nathan's gaze remained focused on the service hallway. A wheeled cart labeled Tech Support Audio Reserves was approaching the back access door. One person is pushing for it. Average height, a flipped lanyard to hide the ID photo, and a black polo shirt. The build was identical to Garrett's, but the limp was gone. The same was true with Nathan's beard from the fight behind the stage. Professionalism and adaptability were exactly what Nathan was looking for in a high-end contractor. Without hesitation, the man dragged his cart approaching the checkpoint. Confident in whatever documents he brought, Nathan came into the hall just as the cart had reached the door. "Hold there," Nathan said in a calm voice that reflected the power of the outfit. The man went on. He actually walked faster. After taking 4 quick steps across the room, Nathan drew his sword, which was no longer ceremonial but deadly serious, and slammed the pommel into the cart's edge. The lid flew open. No audio equipment was present. A single silent shot was fired to the podium above, from a small weapon on a precise gimbal that could be swiftly inserted into the under-podium installation. The man moved forward and skillfully targeted Nathan's throat. Nathan's shoulder drove him against the wall of the corridor with such force that the plaster shattered. The trolley overturned and the weapon spilled on the floor. The assassin groped for a sidearm, but Nathan was faster. In order to quickly end the fight, he placed his open palm to the throat, his knee to the leg, and his elbow to the solar plexus. With a gasp, the man collapsed. Then came the scream from the ballroom. There had been a disturbance. With their hands in their holsters, ready for anything, 2 Royal Protection policemen hurried around the corner. Nathan immediately raised both arms, fingers wide, and spoke in a calm, clear voice. "Royal Guard Ward, contractor is armed, weapon confirmed. Attempted breach of royal proximity." The killer tried one last time in desperation. The ORPOs leveled him before he could get his holster clear, shouting commands, loud radios, and handcuffs. But King Charles had not even batted an eye. He turned to the corridor not in fear, but with the cool awareness of a man who had faced threats for decades, and knew when his guards were on duty. Nathan finally released his breath. He had stopped the bullet. Demonstrating who loaded the gun was a more challenging process. The ballroom fell into controlled chaos as the would-be killer was handcuffed and removed by royal security officers. Journalists pressed on the velvet cords. Cameras were clicking all over the place. Dignitaries whispered urgent questions to one another, while staff spoke into earpieces with strained, pale faces. Throughout, King Charles stayed on stage. He nodded quietly, expressing decades of handling crises with subtle dignity. After briefly leaving the platform to speak with his confidential assistant, after a brief security incident, the secretary said to the audience, "Ladies and gentlemen, please stay seated. His Majesty will resume shortly." Behind the velvet curtain, in a private antechamber, Sergeant Nathan Ward stood at attention. The assassin's weapon was laid out on a white linen table, like evidence in a court-martial. Beside it was the phone that had been unlocked by Palace cybersecurity after being removed from Garrett's equipment belt. The main MOD liaison rummaged through the encrypted texts on the device, his face growing darker with each revelation. Communications from a number simply designated as E. He said that phrases like "event confirmed" and "ensure fallback access via Carter override" matched the details provided by Sergeant Ward, but he stopped and said, "No contact after completion. Discretion. Payment to be routed via C's Trust." The communication had been delivered 36 hours earlier. Nathan felt a cold sensation settle in his stomach. It wasn't surprising because he had heard Camila's voice through the curtain, but knowing and proving were 2 different things. The liaison looked up. Camila's office, the discretionary office, was the only one to use the Treasury-connected account that was tied to the money flow. Her fingerprints were all over the assassination attempt. The liaison spoke on the radio. "Confirming evidence package Alpha. Prepare internal containment protocols. Advise House Command. Immediate administrative separation of discretionary staff. Prep the adjacent chamber. Within minutes, Camila's closest aides were being quietly taken into custody, having their access cards suspended, laptops locked, and phones confiscated. With surgical precision, the royal security apparatus seized evidence and sealed up any potential openings. Nathan watched it happen grimly. These weren't the blatantly theatrical aspects of a public arrest. This was institutional authority defending itself with a destructive, silent efficiency. The liaison for the MOD nodded to Nathan. They continued along a hallway that was adorned with portraits of long-dead kings, each one a reminder of the continuity Nathan had worked to preserve. The conference room door had no nameplate, and it said, "You're needed in the private conference room." Behind its oak panels, there was no trace of what had happened. Inside, King Charles waited. Camila followed suit. She stopped behind a burgundy leather chair, her coat half-buttoned, as if she had been interrupted on her way out. When she saw Nathan enter, her eyes widened a little, not enough to show Nile, but enough to show knowledge. The weapon, the mount, and the phone with its damning message trail were all strewn across the mahogany table, connecting a hired killer to the highest levels of the royal family. King Charles regarded the display with the same poise he had shown on stage. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, yet it was authoritative. "This is all confirmed," Nathan said. "Yes, Your Majesty," with dignity. Charles turned to Camila with the slow, deliberate gesture of a man who picks his words deliberately. "I trusted you with this household." Camila's chin went up in defiance. "I did what was necessary for the future of the crown," Charles replied. "No," in a straightforward and firm manner. "You did what was unforgivable." The silence that followed was stiff as a wire. Despite the weight of history pressing down on the room, Nathan remained still. It was not just a straightforward attempt at assassination. It was about the spirit of an organization that had survived centuries of scandals, wars, and political upheaval. Camila broke the silence with a worried tone of voice. "Charles, you don't understand what this monarchy is becoming. You think it can survive on sentiment and tradition, but the world doesn't wait for hesitation. It doesn't wait for weakness." Without raising his voice, Charles asked, "So, your solution was murder?" She whispered, "I gave you chances," and her voice suddenly became faster. "Months of chances. You kept delaying reforms, postponing necessary decisions. You wanted to bring Anne back into succession discussions. You started treating Charlotte like some kind of symbol, instead of recognizing political reality." The king's expression did not change, but Nathan could see the little tightening around his eyes. These were political debates that went beyond theory. They were betrayals of family members that were passed off as policy disputes. The Commonwealth ministers were losing faith. Camila continued, her composure wavering. The Australian Parliament was discussing alternatives. Canada was questioning the relevance of the crown. I was managing a constitutional crisis while you held tea parties with children's charities. So you decided the solution was to make me a martyr? Charles asked in a cool, collected tone. "I decided the solution was transition before collapse," she stated. "William understands modern monarchy. He knows how to work with governments instead of lecturing them about duty and service." Nathan felt himself speaking before he could stop. "So you decided to put a gun under his podium." Camila's eyes were blazing as she turned to face him. "I did what had to be done to protect the future of the crown from sentimental paralysis," she continued, gesturing to Charles. "Not to silence her, but to regain control of the room." Charles raised his hand. "I swore an oath," he replied, his voice resonating with decades of expertise. As the king turned to face her, Nathan saw that his expression shifted from one of rage to one of profound regret. "Not to efficiency, not to popularity polls, not to your vision of political necessity. I swore to serve the people who place their trust in that crown. You violated that oath. Not just mine, your own." Camila's voice grew very quiet. "I kept this place functioning while you grieved for your mother." Charles nodded once. He looked at the liaison from the MOD and replied, "And now you'll step away while I repair what you've broken. Effective immediately. Suspend all operations of the discretionary office. Seal the records. Any household staff connected to these communications are to be placed under administrative review pending full investigation." Camila moved as if to protest, but Charles didn't give her the space. "You are suspended from any official household capacity until this matter reaches its conclusion. You'll remain at High Grove under house supervision." Then to Nathan, "You'll be placed under temporary royal protection detail. You're not to leave Windsor grounds without escort until we're certain there are no additional threats." "Yes, sir." Charles stepped forward, his voice growing more personal. "You saved my life today, Sergeant Ward. More than that, you may have saved the crown from something far worse than an assassin's bullet." Nathan gave a slight nod. With its weight of responsibility, a salute would have felt somehow out of place in this situation. Employees of the palace entered from the corner with sealed evidence containers and legal documents. Justice was already in motion. silent and unstoppable. The woman who had stood by the throne was now being taken toward a side exit, not in public shame, and it was the type of controlled fall from favor that the monarchy had perfected over years. The door closed behind her, leaving Nathan alone with the king for a moment. "Your Majesty," Nathan went on quietly, "were there any other threats or anything else I should have seen?" In his eyes, Charles gave him what may have been pride. "You saw everything that mattered, Sergeant. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who convince themselves they're protecting the same thing you are, just in a different way." The king made a stop at the entryway. Then he was gone, leaving Nathan alone with the evidence of a conspiracy that had been just minutes away from being successful. "My mother would have been proud of you." London went about its daily business outside, unaware of how close it had come to losing a queen. To protect the throne from within, would a royal guard risk all for it? Did King Charles have the right idea to handle Camilla's treachery in a secret way, or should justice have been carried out more publicly? And how would you have reacted if you had overheard a homicidal plot in the corridors of power? Tell us in the space provided for comments. Every single one was read by us. If you believe that some commitments are worth violating all the rules to honor, click like. Make sure you are subscribed and that alerts are enabled. We upload stories like this every day, and if you know anyone who thinks royal guards are only for show, show them this video. View our other stories as they currently play on your screen, and we'll see you with another amazing story tomorrow at the same time and place. Until then, stay vigilant.